Champagne corks popped as my mother announced her grandest wedding gift ever. She had just sold the Hawthorne Bluff, my $15 million inheritance, to hand the cash to my stepsister. But 10 miles away, a closing agent had just found a dusty document with a 10-year-old signature that would ruin everything. My mother smiled, unaware that her victory lap was actually a death march. The game had not ended. It had only just begun. My name is Alara Whitfield, and for the last 7 years, I have made my living resurrecting the past as a senior restoration specialist at Ironwood Heritage Solutions. I spend my days breathing life back into decaying Victorian manses and crumbling Federalist townhouses, scrubbing away decades of neglect to reveal the original soul of the architecture. I know how to spot a hairline fracture in a load-bearing beam before the ceiling collapses. I know how to distinguish between a genuine patina and water damage disguised with cheap varnish. I have spent my entire adult life learning how to protect structural integrity. Yet I failed to see the rot spreading through the foundation of my own family until the walls were already caving in on top of me. It was a Tuesday night, or rather, early Wednesday morning. The digital clock on my laptop read 12:14 in the morning. I was alone in my office in Boston, surrounded by blueprints for a brownstone in Beacon Hill. The smell of stale coffee and old paper heavy in the air. My phone sat face up on the desk, silent until the screen lit up with a notification. It was a standard automated alert from a real estate monitoring service I had set up years ago, a digital heartbeat monitor for the one thing in this world that actually mattered to me. The subject line was innocuous enough. Status update for 44 Hawthorne Lane. I frowned, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. That address belonged to the Hawthorne Bluff. It was my house. Well, technically, it was the house my grandmother, Josephine, had left to me in a trust. But my mother, Sylvia, and my stepfather, Gavin, had been living there for the past 5 years. We had an agreement, or so I thought. They covered the taxes and utilities in exchange for living in a $15 million coastal estate for free, acting as caretakers until I was ready to move back to Maine permanently. I clicked the email, expecting to see a tax assessment update or perhaps a zoning notice. Instead, the screen refreshed, and the blood drained from my face so fast it left me dizzy. Property status, pending sale. Listing price, $15,500,000. Listing agent Lux Coastal Realty. I stared at the screen, blinking, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Pending sale. That was impossible. You cannot sell a house you do not own. The deed was wrapped tight inside the Josephine Trust, and I was the sole beneficiary. My mother was a trustee, yes, but her powers were limited to maintenance and preservation. She had absolutely no authority to liquidate the asset. I refreshed the page. The status remained. Pending sale. The photos accompanying the listing were recent. There was the grand foyer with its dual staircase, the hand-carved mahogany banisters gleaming under the chandelier. There was the library where my grandmother used to read me stories, now stripped of her antique globe and leather armchairs, replaced by tacky modern white sofas that looked like they belonged in a Miami nightclub. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, bird-like rhythm. I grabbed my phone. It was nearly 12:30 in the morning, but I did not care. I dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice thick with sleep, or perhaps the Chardonnay she drank like water. Alara. Good Lord, do you know what time it is? Mom, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Why did I just get a notification that the Hawthorne Bluff is under contract? There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that lasted 2 seconds too long. When she spoke again, the sleepiness had vanished, replaced by that sugary, dismissive tone she used whenever she wanted to shut me down. Oh, that, Sylvia said, letting out a forced little laugh. Don't be dramatic, Alara. It is just a glitch. Gavin was testing the market value for insurance purposes. You know how obsessive he gets about asset valuation. We have to keep the insurance premiums accurate. A glitch doesn't mark a property as pending sale. Mom, I countered. gripping the phone tighter. And listing it with an agency isn't an insurance appraisal. Who is the buyer? Why is there a listing agent? I told you, it is nothing, she snapped, the sugar dissolving. Honestly, Ilara, you are overworking yourself. You sound paranoid. We are just busy preparing the house for the wedding. Bella is so stressed out. And we are trying to make sure the estate looks perfect for the reception. We don't need you adding your neurotic energy to the mix right now. Bella, my stepsister, the wedding, of course. For the past 6 months, every conversation had revolved around Bella's upcoming nuptials to some hedge fund manager's son. The wedding of the century. Sylvia had called it. I am coming up there, I said. Do not be ridiculous, Sylvia said sharply. It is the middle of the night. You have work tomorrow. Just go to sleep. Ilara, we will talk about this on the weekend when you have calmed down. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there in the silence of my office, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. My mother was a liar. She had always been a liar, but she was usually a better one than this. Her deflection was sloppy. It was desperate. I did not go home to my apartment. I walked out to the parking garage, threw my laptop bag into the passenger seat of my Volvo, and drove north. The drive from Boston to the coast of Maine usually took about 3 hours, but I made it in 2.5. The interstate was empty, a ribbon of asphalt stretching out into the darkness. Rain began to fall as I crossed the state line, a cold, relentless New England drizzle that blurred the windshield. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction I had had with Gavin over the last year. Gavin was a man who wore his insecurity like a cheap cologne. He had married my mother 10 years ago, shortly after my father died, bringing with him his daughter, Bella, and a resume full of entrepreneurial ventures that never seemed to turn a profit. He liked to play the part of the patriarch, the lord of the manor, but he had always looked at the Hawthorne Bluff with a hunger that made me uneasy. He did not see the history in the walls. He saw the dollar signs in the square footage. I turned off the highway and onto the winding coastal road that led to the cliffs. The ocean was invisible in the dark, but I could hear it. The deep, rhythmic crashing of waves against the granite rocks below. When I reached the private drive that led to the estate, I killed my headlights. I did not want them to know I was there. Not yet. I guided the car slowly up the gravel path, the tires crunching softly, the sound masked by the wind and the rain. I parked the car behind a grove of spruce trees about 100 yards from the main house. The Hawthorne Bluff stood like a fortress against the night sky. It was a massive shingle-style masterpiece built in 1890, with turrets and wraparound porches that overlooked the Atlantic. But tonight, it did not look like my grandmother's home. It looked like a stage set. Every light in the house was blazing. Floodlights illuminated the manicured lawn, and I could see caterers' trucks parked near the service entrance. But it was the activity in the main solarium that caught my eye. I pulled my hood up and stepped out of the car, moving through the shadows of the garden. The rain was colder here, carrying the bite of the salt spray. I crept closer, using the overgrown hydrangeas which I noticed with a pang of anger had been severely pruned back for cover. I reached the edge of the stone patio. The glass doors of the solarium were closed, but the ventilation windows at the top were cracked open to let out the cigar smoke. Gavin was there. He was wearing a tuxedo, which was odd for a Tuesday night, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. Standing opposite him was a couple I did not recognize. Though they reeked of old money, the man was tall, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders. The woman was adorned in pearls that probably cost more than my annual salary. "The view is truly unparalleled," Gavin was saying, his voice booming with that false joviality he used when he was trying to sell something. He gestured grandly toward the black void of the ocean. "And the privacy you simply cannot buy this kind of seclusion anymore. It is the crown jewel of the coast." "It is magnificent," Gavin, the silver-haired man, said. "Truly, we were worried about the timeline, given the complexities of coastal zoning." "Nonsense," Gavin waved his hand dismissively. "The title is clean. We are just fast-tracking the closing so we can finalize everything before the wedding on Saturday. I want the funds cleared so I can gift the deed transfer to my daughter as a symbolic gesture before you take possession next week. It is a tax thing, you understand?" I froze. A symbolic gesture. He was lying to the buyers, pretending he was giving it to Bella before selling it to them. It made no sense, unless he was laundering the explanation to cover up why the paperwork was rushing through so fast. "And you are sure about the price?" the woman asked, running her hand along the back of a velvet chair. 15.5 seems generous for a property of this magnitude. "We are motivated sellers," Gavin said, leaning in, his voice dropping, but I could still hear him clearly over the wind. "To be honest, Bob, I have some liquidity needs. A few investments in the crypto market took a temporary dip. You know how volatile it is, and I want to make sure Bella's wedding is the event of the decade. I want her to have everything. A father does what he has to do." I felt bile rise in my throat. Crypto. Of course. Gavin had been rambling about Bitcoin and Ethereum at Thanksgiving, trying to get me to invest my savings. He had gambled. He had lost. And now he was selling my heritage to cover his debts and throw a party for his spoiled daughter. "Well," the man, Bob, said, raising his glass, "to the Hawthorne Bluff. We are honored to be the next stewards." "To the sale," Gavin beamed, clinking his glass against theirs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up one of the heavy stone planters and hurl it through the glass. But then, I saw her. My mother walked into the frame. Sylvia was wearing a silk dressing gown, her hair perfectly coiffed. She was carrying a bottle of vintage champagne, Grandma Josephine's 1995 Reserve. I realized with a jolt of horror, that bottle was supposed to be saved for my wedding. She walked up to Gavin and the couple, a gracious smile plastered on her face. She poured the champagne into their glasses, laughing at something the woman said. "Sylvia, darling," Gavin said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I was just telling Bob and Linda how excited we are to hand over the keys next week." "Oh, absolutely," my mother said. Her voice was steady. There was no hesitation, no guilt. "It is time for us to downsize. This place is just too much for 2 people, and we are so happy it is going to a lovely family." I staggered back from the window, my boots sinking into the wet mud. It wasn't just Gavin. That was the knife that twisted in my gut. I had always known Gavin was a grifter, a man who viewed people as stepping stones. But my mother. She knew what this house meant to me. She knew it was the only thing Josephine had left me, the only place where I felt safe after my father died. She knew the trust documents explicitly stated the house was to stay in the family. She wasn't being coerced. She wasn't a victim of Gavin's bullying. She was pouring the champagne. She was facilitating the lie. She was selling me out. I looked at her through the glass, watching her touch Gavin's arm affectionately. They were partners. They were burning my life to the ground to keep themselves warm, to pay for his gambling mistakes and her vanity. I realized then that if I stormed in there now, shouting about trusts and rights, they would gaslight me. They would call the police and claim I was hysterical. They would tell these buyers, Bob and Linda, that I was the mentally unstable daughter they had to manage. Gavin probably already had a story prepared. I needed to be smarter. I needed to know exactly how they managed to list the house when I held the deed. I needed to see the paperwork. I backed away slowly, retreating into the darkness of the pine grove. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my coat, chilling me to the bone. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice forming in my chest. I watched them toast one more time, the crystal glasses catching the light. "Enjoy the champagne," I whispered into the dark, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. "Because it is the last thing you will ever celebrate in this house." I turned and walked back to my car. I did not drive back to Boston. Instead, I drove 10 miles south to the town of Ogunquit, pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel. I needed to be close. I needed to be ready. Tomorrow, I would not be the daughter, I would be the investigator. And if they wanted a war over the Hawthorne Bluff, I would give them one that would leave nothing but scorched earth in its wake. I drove back to Boston in a fugue state, the windshield wipers slicing through the pre-dawn grayness like metronomes counting down the time I had left. I needed to get to my apartment. I needed the papers. My grandmother, Josephine Hawthorne, had been many things: a socialite, a philanthropist, a terrifying bridge player, but above all, she was a woman of ironclad intuition. She had died 4 years ago, but her ghost still seemed to dictate the terms of my life. I remembered the day she updated her will. 10 years ago, sitting in her sunroom with a spine as rigid as a steel rod. It was the same year my mother married Gavin. While everyone else was toasting to the happy couple with crystal flutes, Josephine had been watching Gavin with the cold, predatory gaze of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "He smiles too much with his mouth and not enough with his eyes," she had told me, tapping a manicured fingernail against her cane. "And your mother, God bless her, has the survival instincts of a fainting goat. When I am gone, Elara, you will be the wall between our legacy and his greed. Do not let me down." I reached my apartment in the South End just as the sun was bleeding into the skyline. I didn't bother unpacking. I went straight to the walk-in closet in my bedroom, pulled back the loose floorboard behind the shoe rack, and revealed the wall safe I had installed the week after Josephine's funeral. My fingers trembled as I dialed the combination. It was Josephine's birthday. The heavy door swung open. Inside lay a thick, leather-bound portfolio. The Josephine Trust. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it. This was not just paper. It was a shield. I flipped through the pages until I found the original deed and the trust formation documents. Everything was there: the irrevocable clauses, the succession plans, the explicit prohibition against the sale of the Hawthorne Bluff without the written, notarized consent of the primary beneficiary, me. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for Vance Associates. Arthur Vance had been my grandmother's attorney for 40 years. He was the only man in Boston she trusted, mostly because he was as ruthless as she was. "Vance Associates," a receptionist answered. Her voice clipped and professional. "I need to speak to Arthur Vance immediately," I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I shoved the documents into my bag. "This is Elara Whitfield. It is an emergency regarding the Hawthorne estate." There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end. "Ms. Whitfield," the receptionist said, her tone softening into professional sympathy. "I am afraid Mr. Vance passed away last autumn. I thought the firm had sent out notifications to all clients." My stomach dropped. Arthur was dead. The one person who knew where all the bodies were buried was gone. "Who is handling his caseload?" I asked, fighting the rising panic. "Who has the Hawthorne file?" "That would be his son, Marcus Vance. He took over the senior partner role in January." "Put me through," I said. "Now." An hour later, I was sitting in a corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district. The room smelled of espresso and expensive leather. Marcus Vance did not look like his father. Arthur had been a round, jovial man who hid his intellect behind a veneer of grandfatherly warmth. Marcus was sharp angles and kinetic energy. He looked to be about 35, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. And his eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently scanning the documents I had slammed onto his desk. He hadn't said a word for 10 minutes. He just read, flipping pages with a rhythmic snap, occasionally making a note on a yellow legal pad. Finally, he looked up. "You saw the listing online." "I saw the house," I corrected him. "I drove up there last night. Gavin is already entertaining buyers. They are pushing for a closing this Friday, 2 days from now." Marcus leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. "And you want to know how they managed to list a property that is locked inside an irrevocable trust?" "I know how they did it," I said, my voice rising. "They are lying. My mother is the trustee, but she doesn't have the power to sell." "She does not," Marcus agreed. He turned his monitor so I could see it. "But according to the preliminary title search I ran while you were parking your car, Sylvia didn't sign the listing agreement as a trustee." I squinted at the screen. It was a digital copy of the listing contract with Lux Coastal Realty. The signature at the bottom was my mother's, but next to it was a stamp I didn't recognize. "She signed with a power of attorney," Marcus said, "claiming to act on your behalf." "I never gave her power of attorney," I said, ice forming in my veins. The only power of attorney I ever signed was a medical proxy when I had my tonsils out at 22. That expired years ago. "It gets worse," Marcus said. He didn't offer comfort. He offered facts. That was exactly what I needed. He clicked open another file. "To sell a property held in this specific type of trust, the beneficiary usually has to sign off on the deed transfer. If the beneficiary you is unavailable or unwilling, there are only two ways to bypass them." He slid a printed document across the mahogany desk toward me. It was a photocopy of a court filing from a county I had never visited in upstate Maine. "Option 1 is death," Marcus said efficiently. "Option 2 is incapacitation." I looked at the document. It was a certificate of incapacity and guardianship request. It was dated 6 months ago. In it, a doctor whose name I did not recognize had signed a sworn affidavit stating that Alara Whitfield was suffering from severe mental instability and chemical dependency, rendering her unfit to manage her financial affairs. Below that was a signature that looked terrifyingly like mine, waiving my right to contest the diagnosis. "They had me declared incompetent," I whispered. The room seemed to tilt. "They told a court I was crazy so they could sell my house." "And here's the kicker," Marcus said, pointing to the second page. "This is a renunciation of interest. It claims that due to your condition, you have voluntarily relinquished all claims to the Hawthorne estate in exchange for a monthly stipend to cover your treatment facility costs." I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall behind me. "I am going to kill him. I am going to drive back up there, walk into that house, and I am going to strangle Gavin with his own silk tie." "Sit down, Alara," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it had the crack of a whip. "Do not tell me to sit down," I snapped. "You see this? This is fraud. This is forgery. Call the police. Call the sheriff in Ogunquit. Stop the sale." "If you call the police now," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a calm, analytical register, "Gavin will claim it was a clerical error. He will say he got bad advice from a shady consultant. He will throw some paralegal under the bus. The sale will be stopped. Yes, but Gavin will walk away. He will claim he was just a desperate father trying to manage a difficult family situation. A judge might give him probation, maybe a fine." I stared at him, my chest heaving. He forged my signature. He called me a drug addict in a court of law. "And right now, it is just a piece of paper," Marcus said. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the harbor. "But if he goes through with the closing, if he accepts that check from the buyers, if he signs the final deed transfer based on these fraudulent documents, then he has committed wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and because the amount is over $1 million and it involves interstate commerce, it becomes a federal crime." He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with a cold, hard light. "Arthur Vance played defense. I play offense. Do you want to stop him, or do you want to bury him?" The question hung in the air between us. I thought of Gavin's smug face in the solarium. I thought of my mother pouring the champagne, smiling while she sold my birthright. I thought of Bella, the stepsister who had treated me like a ghost in my own home. Now planning to tear up my grandmother's rose garden for a pool. "I want to bury him," I said. "Then you have to let him hold the shovel," Marcus said. "You cannot stop the sale today. You cannot let them know you know. You have to let them think they have won. You have to let them walk all the way to the edge of the cliff." "What do I do?" I asked. "You go to the wedding," Marcus said. "You play the part. You act like the sister who is too busy with her career to care about the old drafty house. You smile. You drink the wine. And you make sure you are in the room when the closing happens. I will do the rest." "They won't want me there," I said. "Sylvia practically told me to stay away last night." "They will want you there if you bring a peace offering," Marcus said. "Call your mother." Apologize for being neurotic on the phone. Tell her you realize she is right, that the house is a burden, and you are happy to see it go. Tell her you want to sign a quitclaim deed in person to make sure the title is clean for the new owners. Gavin is greedy, but he is also paranoid about the paperwork. If you offer to sign something that legitimizes his fraud, he will roll out the red carpet for you. I felt a wave of nausea. The idea of apologizing to the woman who had betrayed me was physically repulsing. But then I looked at the forged medical document again. I looked at the lie that erased my sanity to fill their pockets. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady now, cold. "Fine," I said to Marcus. "Let's set the trap." I dialed Sylvia's number. It was 9 a.m. now. She would be awake, probably directing the florists. "Elara?" Her voice was guarded. "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone that felt like swallowing glass. "Listen, I am sorry about last night. I was tired, and I saw that alert, and I panicked. I have been thinking about it, and you are right." There was a pause. Yes, I said. "I mean, Ironwood is sending me to Europe next month for a huge project. I won't be able to visit Maine for years. And frankly, the upkeep on Hawthorne Bluff is a nightmare. If you found a buyer willing to pay $15 million, well, we would be idiots not to take it." I could practically hear the tension leaving her body. "Oh, Elara, I am so glad you see reason. We are doing this for the family." "I know," I said. "And I want to be there, for Bella, and for you. Plus, I want to make sure the transition is smooth. I can come up Friday morning, sign whatever needs to be signed, and wish the new owners luck. Maybe I can even toast to Gavin's business acumen." "That would be wonderful," Sylvia gushed. The relief in her voice was sickening. "Gavin will be so pleased. We were worried well. It doesn't matter. Just come. Wear something blue. It is the theme." "I will be there," I said. "I promise." I hung up the phone and looked at Marcus. He was already typing on his computer, drafting the subpoena, the restraining orders, the affidavits that would detonate their lives. "Friday at noon," I said. "Friday at noon," Marcus confirmed. "I will have a contact at the title company. We need a closer who is by the book, someone who checks every comma." "I know just the type," I said, thinking of the meticulous, terrifying archivists I worked with at Ironwood. "Find me someone who hates liars more than they love money." "I will find you a shark," Marcus promised. I walked out of the office and into the bustling Boston street. The city was loud, alive, and oblivious to the war that had just been declared. I felt a strange sense of calm. The confusion of the night before was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a singular, crystalline focus. They wanted to sell my past. Fine. I would let them. But the price tag was going to be a lot higher than $15 million. It was going to cost them everything. I got back into my car and pointed it north again. I had a role to play. I had to go back to the Hawthorne Bluff and smile at the people who were holding the knife to my back. I had to act like the incapacitated daughter they claimed I was weak, pliable, and unsuspecting. I turned on the radio to drown out the silence. I was not Elara the victim anymore. I was the Trojan horse, and I was bringing the fire right through the front gate. I pulled my Volvo into the circular driveway of the Hawthorne Bluff at 2 p.m. on Thursday, and for a moment, I thought I had taken a wrong turn and ended up at a circus. The pristine, windswept grounds of my grandmother's estate had been colonized by a battalion of white vans. Men in headsets were shouting orders, rolling giant spools of cable across the lawn, while a massive marquee tent, large enough to house a small aircraft, was being erected dangerously close to the cliff edge. It was a spectacle of excess, a frantic attempt to scream wealth so loudly that it drowned out the sound of the creditors knocking at the door. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, but my expression was a perfect, porcelain mask of submission. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the lion's den. "Elara, you actually came." The voice was high, shrill, and grated against my nerves like a dentist's drill. Bella came bounding down the front steps, her arms flung wide. My stepsister looked like she had been dipped in gold dust. She was wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than my first car, and on her finger sat a diamond the size of a skating rink. She hugged me, a cloud of cloying perfume enveloping me. I stiffened, then forced my arms to pat her back. "Hello, Bella," I said. "The place looks busy." "Isn't it amazing?" she squealed, pulling back to gesture at the chaos. "Daddy said the sky is the limit. We have the florist flying in hydrangeas from Holland because the local ones just look too sad. And look at the tent. It has a transparent roof so we can dance under the stars. It is going to be the wedding of the century. Elara, seriously, people are going to die of jealousy." "I am sure they will," I said, managing a tight smile. "Come inside. You have to see the seating chart. I put you at table 9. It is a bit far from the head table, but you know, family politics," she giggled, oblivious to the fact that I was the only reason she had a roof over her head. "Oh, and Daddy said you were super cool about the house sale. Honestly, I was worried you would be all sentimental about it, but this is so much better. Cash is king." "Right. Right," I said. "Cash is king." We walked into the foyer, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The house felt different. It wasn't just the wedding clutter, the stacks of gift bags, the garment racks, the boxes of favors. It was what was missing. As Bella chattered on about the DJ list, my eyes scanned the room. The space where the grandfather clock had stood since 1920 was empty, a slightly brighter patch of wallpaper the only evidence it had ever been there. I looked toward the alcove near the library, the bronze statue of Hermes, a piece my grandfather had brought back from Italy after the war, was gone. My stomach twisted. They weren't just selling the house, they were cannibalizing it. "Where is the clock?" I asked, interrupting Bella's monologue about vegan versus non-vegan appetizers. Bella blinked, looking at the empty spot. "Oh, that old thing Daddy sent it out for cleaning, or restoration, something like that. He said it was too noisy anyway. The ticking was driving Mom crazy." "Restoration," I repeated. "Right." I walked into the living room, and there they were. Sylvia and Gavin were standing by the fireplace, looking for all the world like the lords of the manor. Gavin was holding a tablet, scrolling furiously, while my mother adjusted a vase of flowers that cost $300 a stem. When they saw me, the air in the room shifted. For a split second, I saw the fear in Gavin's eyes, a flicker of the prey realizing the predator has entered the clearing. But then the salesman mask slammed back into place. "Elara!" Gavin boomed, striding forward with his arms open. He grabbed me in a bear hug that felt like being squeezed by a boa constrictor. He smelled of scotch and nervous sweat. "So glad you made it, kiddo. Really, it means a lot to your mother and me." "Hi, Gavin," I said. Extracting myself from his grip, I turned to my mother. "Hi, Mom." Sylvia approached me cautiously, like I was a bomb that might go off. She kissed the air next to my cheek. "You look tired, darling. I told you that job works you too hard, but I'm so relieved you are here, and I'm so glad you have come around to our way of thinking." "I have," I lied, my voice steady. I realized I was holding on to the past. If selling the house helps the family, then who am I to stand in the way? "Exactly," Gavin exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "That is the spirit, you know. The crypto market has been a roller coaster, but my recent positions have finally matured. Massive returns, just massive. But liquidity is key in this economy. Selling the bluff allows us to diversify, secure Bella's future, and honestly, get you that nest egg you deserve. I am setting aside a nice chunk of the proceeds for you. Elara, you can finally quit that dusty restoration job and travel." "That is very generous of you," I said, "especially since the market has been so volatile." "Oh, you have to know when to hold and when to fold," Gavin winked, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "I have a sixth sense for these things." "I am sure you do," I said. The charade continued through the afternoon. I played the role of the dutiful sister, helping Bella tie ribbons on favors, nodding as my mother lectured me on why beige was a superior color for napkins, but every time I walked through a room. I catalogued the theft, the oil painting of the harbor in the dining room, gone, the silver tea service gone, the Persian rug in the hallway, replaced by a cheap synthetic copy. Gavin had been stripping the house for weeks, liquidating assets to pay the deposits for this farce. Dinner was a torture session served on fine china. We sat at the long mahogany table, one of the few valuable things left, likely because it was too heavy to move quickly. The conversation was dominated by Bella's honeymoon plans to the Maldives, costing $40,000, a trip funded by money that did not exist. I waited until the main course was served before I fired my first shot. "So," I said, cutting into my steak with surgical precision, "the closing is tomorrow, right before the rehearsal dinner." "Noon sharp," Gavin said, taking a large gulp of wine. "Just a formality. Paperwork is all drafted." "And the title search came back clean?" I asked innocently. "I know how tricky these old trusts can be. I would hate for there to be any snags with the deed transfer," Gavin choked. He coughed violently, slamming his glass down, wine sloshing onto the tablecloth. Sylvia froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. "Snags," Gavin wheezed, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "There are no snags. Why would there be snags? The title is pristine. I have handled everything with the lawyers." "I just remember Grandma being so specific about the trust details," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "She always said the paperwork was ironclad. But if you say it is clear, I believe you." "It is clear," Sylvia interjected, her voice high and tight. "Elara, don't start with the legal questions. Gavin has worked tirelessly to make this happen. You should be thanking him, not interrogating him. This house is too big for you anyway. What would a single woman do with 10 bedrooms? It is a burden. We are lifting a burden off your shoulders." "You are right, Mom," I said, taking a sip of water. "I guess I just worry. I wouldn't want the buyers to get into any trouble. They seem like nice people." "They are wonderful people," Gavin said. His face flushed. "Bob and Linda Sterling, pillars of the community. They are going to take great care of the place." As if summoned by the devil himself. The doorbell rang. The housekeeper, a temporary hire, since our old housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, had been fired by Gavin 3 months ago to save money, went to answer it. A moment later, Bob and Linda Sterling walked into the dining room. They looked exactly as they had the night before through the window, elegant, wealthy, and completely oblivious. "So sorry to intrude on dinner," Bob boomed, waving a bottle of wine. "We just drove up from the city and couldn't resist stopping by to see the old girl one more time before we sign the papers tomorrow." Gavin shot out of his chair like a jack-in-the-box. "Bob, Linda." "Not an intrusion at all. Please, join us for a drink." My heart hammered against my ribs. Here they were, the victims, or at least, the collateral damage. "And this must be Elara," Linda said, turning her warm smile toward me. "Gavin has told us so much about you. He said you have been so supportive of the sale, even though you grew up here. That is very mature of you, dear." I stood up and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin soft. She was a grandmother herself, probably. She had no idea she was buying a lawsuit. "It is a pleasure to meet you," I said. The words tasted like ash. "We are just so in love with the history of the house," Bob said, looking around the room. "Gavin told us about your grandmother, Josephine, a remarkable woman. We promise to honor her legacy. We are not going to change a thing about the main structure. Just some updates to the plumbing and electric. Of course." I looked at Gavin. He was practically vibrating with anxiety, his eyes darting between me and the Sterlings, terrified I would say something. "Tell them," a voice screamed in my head. "Tell them right now. Tell them Gavin is a fraud. Tell them the deed is locked. Save them." But then I heard Marcus's voice in my ear. "Let them walk to the edge of the cliff. If I warned them now, they would pull out. The deal would collapse. Gavin would spin a story about a misunderstanding. He would escape. And 6 months from now, he would try again. Maybe with a different buyer. Maybe with better forgeries. I needed him to sign that paper. I needed the crime to be complete. I am glad to hear that, I said to Bob. The house deserves people who appreciate it. Absolutely, Gavin said loudly, stepping between us. Well, why don't we take this into the study? I have some cigars I've been saving. Alara is probably tired from her drive. He was dismissing me. He wanted me out of the room before I cracked. Actually, I said, I think I will go for a walk in the garden. Clear my head. Great idea, Sylvia said quickly. Go on, Alara. We will see you in the morning. I walked out through the French doors onto the back patio. The night air was cool, smelling of salt and damp earth. The massive tent glowed in the distance like a spaceship, but I turned away from it, walking toward the south lawn where my grandmother's rose garden lay. It was a sanctuary. Josephine had cultivated these roses for 50 years. There were rare breeds here, heritage stems that didn't exist anywhere else in New England. It was a maze of thorns and velvet petals, a place where I had cried when my father died, where I had read my first book, where I had hidden from the world. I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. It was Bella. She was holding a glass of champagne, swaying slightly. It is creepy out here, she mumbled, shivering. It is peaceful, I corrected her. Whatever, she said. She swept her hand toward the roses. You know, this is the first thing to go. I froze. What? The garden, Bella said, taking a sip of wine. Bob and Linda were talking about keeping it, but I told Daddy to convince them otherwise. Before they move in, I am going to have the excavators come in next week. I want an infinity pool right here. Can you imagine, looking over the edge into the ocean? It will be all over Instagram. The Hawthorne pool. It is going to be iconic. I stared at her. She wasn't just talking about renovation. She was talking about erasure. She wanted to dig up 50 years of my grandmother's love and labor to pour concrete for a vanity project. You are going to destroy Grandma's roses? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They are just bushes. Alara, Bella laughed, cruel and dismissive. They are full of bugs. Besides, who cares about old flowers? We need something modern, something that screams luxury. Daddy promised me he would include the demolition in the closing agreement as a site prep bonus for me. She turned and walked back toward the house, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. Don't stay out too long, sis. You don't want to look haggard for the photos tomorrow. I stood alone in the garden. My hand gripping the thorny stem of a Josephine's glory rose until it pierced my skin. A drop of blood welled up on my thumb, dark and round like a ruby. The conflict in my chest vanished. The guilt about the Sterlings evaporated. Any lingering hesitation about sending my family to prison was gone. They weren't just thieves. They were vandals. They were destroying everything beautiful in the world because they were too hollow to understand its value. I looked at the house, glowing with stolen light. Dig your pool, Bella, I whispered to the wind. Dig it deep, because you are all going to drown in it. I turned and walked back toward the house. I had a closing to attend, and I needed to make sure my outfit for tomorrow was perfect. Black seemed appropriate. It was, after all, going to be a funeral for their lives. Friday morning dawned not with the chirping of birds, but with the industrial roar of a generator truck parking on the front lawn. It was the day of the closing. It was 3 days before the wedding. It was the beginning of the end. The house had ceased to be a home. It was now a logistical battlefield. The air conditioner was fighting a losing war against the humidity and the body heat of 50 florists, caterers, and lighting technicians swarming the ground floor. I sat on the window seat in my old bedroom, watching the chaos below. A team of men was erecting a secondary marquee, their hammers striking metal with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. I checked my watch. It was 8 a.m. By noon, we were scheduled to be at the offices of Vance Associates, though Gavin believed he was meeting a different, more pliable attorney to sign the final papers. I walked downstairs, navigating a maze of white hydrangeas and stacked gold Chiavari chairs. The tension in the house was physical, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. Gavin was in the library, or what was left of it. The door was ajar. He was pacing back and forth, wearing a tracksuit that looked slept in. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and he was screaming. "I do not care about the wire cut-off times," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I need that money in the account by 2 o'clock today. Today, if it rolls over to Monday, I will sue your entire firm for incompetence. Do you hear me? I have vendors to pay." I paused in the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. Vendors. Vendors did not demand wire transfers with that level of desperation. You could pay a florist with a credit card. You could pay a caterer with a check. You needed a wire transfer for only two things: buying property or paying off people who broke kneecaps for a living. Gavin slammed the phone down on the desk. I heard the sound of glass shattering a paperweight. Probably. I took a deep breath and walked into the room, feigning a look of concern. "Is everything okay?" "Gavin?" I asked. I heard shouting. He spun around, his eyes wide and bloodshot. For a second, he looked like a cornered animal. Then he forced a jagged smile onto his face. "Stress, Ilara." "Just stress," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "These bank people are incompetents, bureaucrats. They do not understand how business works. I'm just trying to make sure everything is liquid for the wedding payments." "I can imagine," I said, walking over to the sideboard to pour myself a coffee. "But the closing is at noon. The money usually clears within an hour, right?" "That is what the agent said." "Right, yes. Within an hour," he muttered. He looked at his phone again, his thumb tapping the screen frantically. I moved closer. "You know, if there is a cash flow issue with the wedding, I have some savings. I could loan you a few thousand to cover the deposits until the house money comes through." I wanted to see his reaction. I wanted to see how deep the hole was. Gavin let out a short, hysterical laugh. "A few thousand, Ilara? Sweetie, that is cute. But we are talking about real money here, big boy money. Do not worry your pretty little head about it." He turned away to look out the window, and I saw my chance. His phone, not his regular iPhone, but a cheap, black flip phone I had never seen before, buzzed on the desk. It was sitting on top of a stack of invoices. I glanced down. The screen was lit up with a text message. It was short. It was brutal. "TikTok, Gavin. The principals want the full 15 by sunset. No extensions, no excuses, or we take the girl." My blood ran cold. The girl, Bella. Or me. It did not matter. Gavin wasn't just investing in bad crypto. He had borrowed money from organized crime. He wasn't selling my house to fund a wedding. He was selling it to buy his life. The wedding was just the cover story, the shiny object to distract everyone while he frantically tried to fill a $15 million hole he had dug for himself. "Gavin!" My mother's voice came from the doorway. Sylvia looked pale. She was wearing a silk robe, but her hands were shaking as she clutched the lapels together. Gavin snatched the burner phone off the desk and shoved it into his pocket. "What is it?" "Sylvia, I am busy." "I was just thinking," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should wait until Monday to sign. I mean, the wedding is Saturday. It is so rushed. And Ilara, well, I just want to make sure the paperwork regarding her condition is handled discreetly." She was wavering. Not out of morality, but out of fear. She could smell the desperation on him, and it was making her sick. Gavin crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her by the shoulders. It wasn't a hug. It was a restraint. "We are not waiting," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "We sign today. We get the money today. Do you understand? There is no plan B. Sylvia, if we do not close this deal by this afternoon, we lose everything. The house, the wedding, everything." "But why?" she whimpered. "Why is it so urgent?" "Because I said so," he roared. Shaking her once, I stepped forward. Hey, take it easy. Gavin, Mom is just tired. He released her, smoothing his tracksuit. I am sorry. I am sorry. Sylvia, I am just under a lot of pressure. I want this to be perfect for you and Bella. Just trust me. Okay, get dressed. We leave in an hour. Sylvia looked at him, then at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but she nodded. She was too weak to fight him. She turned and fled the room. I looked at Gavin. You should shower. Gavin, you look like you're about to have a heart attack. I am fine, he snapped. Just be ready. I went back to my room and texted Marcus immediately. He is in deep with loan sharks. Deadline is sunset. He is desperate and dangerous. Watch your back, Marcus replied instantly. Good. Desperation makes people sloppy. I have a surprise waiting for him at the title company. We arrived at the offices of the title company at 11:45. It wasn't Marcus's office we were maintaining the ruse that I was using Gavin's lawyers. The meeting was at a neutral location, a boutique title agency called Coastal Abstract that Gavin had bullied into rushing the process. The conference room was glass-walled and sterile. The Sterlings were already there, looking cheerful and rich. Bob was reading the Wall Street Journal. Linda was looking at paint swatches. Gavin walked in like a man marching to the gallows, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. Sylvia was a ghost beside him, pale and silent. Here we are, Gavin announced, his voice too loud for the small room. The big day. Exciting times, Bob said, folding his newspaper. We have the cashier's check ready, $15,500,000, made out to the Josephine Trust, care of Sylvia Whitfield, trustee. I saw Gavin's eye twitch. He didn't want the check made out to the trust. He wanted it wired to an offshore account he had likely set up weeks ago, but he couldn't say that now. Wonderful, Gavin said. Let's get the paperwork started. Where is the closing agent? The door opened, but it wasn't the young, easily intimidated clerk Gavin had been dealing with over the phone. A woman walked in. She was small, perhaps 60 years old, wearing a gray suit that looked like it was made of steel wool. Her hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it pulled at her eyelids. She carried a stack of files that looked heavy enough to crush a man's skull. She walked to the head of the table, set the files down with a heavy thud, and adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. She looked at Gavin with eyes that had seen every scam, every lie, and every forgery in the state of Maine since 1980. Good morning, she said. Her voice was dry as parchment. I am Agnes Pembroke. I have been assigned as the senior closing officer for this transaction due to the high value of the asset and the complexity of the trust involvement. Gavin blanched. Where is Jason? I was working with Jason. Jason is a junior associate, Agnes said, not even looking up as she began to arrange her pens in a perfect line. Jason is not qualified to close a $15 million estate transfer involving a guardianship affidavit. We are in a hurry, Gavin said, drumming his fingers on the table. We need to be done by 1. Agnes looked at him over her spectacles. Mr. Whitfield, I do not rush. I verify. If the paperwork is in order, we will be done when we are done. If it is not, we will be here until Christmas. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Marcus had delivered. He must have pulled every string he had to get Agnes Pembroke assigned to this file. Agnes opened the first folder. Now, I have been reviewing the preliminary title search performed by my colleague. There are a few irregularities in the chain of title dating back to 1990 that I need to clarify before we proceed to the current documents. 1990, Gavin sputtered. That is ancient history. The deed is clear. We have title insurance. Title insurance does not cover fraud. Mr. Whitfield, Agnes said calmly. And I see here a reference to a boundary dispute with the Conservation Commission that was never formally resolved. I need to see the original survey maps. This is ridiculous. Gavin stood up. We are here to sign the deed, not to audit the last century. Sit down, Gavin, Bob Sterling said, his voice losing some of its warmth. If there is a title issue, We want to know about it. We are not handing over $15 million for a property with a clouded title. Gavin sat down slowly. He was vibrating. Fine, he ground out. Check whatever you want, but do it fast. Agnes worked with agonizing slowness. She read every line. She inspected every seal. She held pages up to the light to check the watermarks. While she worked, Gavin excused himself to go to the restroom. I signaled to Marcus, who was not there, but I knew he had eyes on the place, and then I followed Gavin. He didn't go to the restroom. He went to the break room where a young man, Jason, presumably was making coffee. I stopped just around the corner, listening. Look, kid, I heard Gavin whisper. I know Agnes is a tough old bird, but surely there is a way to expedite this. Just get her to skip the historical review. Focus on the current deed. I cannot do that, sir, a young, nervous voice replied. Mrs. Pembroke is the senior officer. There is $5,000 in it for you, Gavin hissed. Cash, right now. Just spill some coffee on the 1990 file. Misplace it. Anything. Sir, please, the kid stammered. I could lose my license. I cannot help you. You useless little... Is there a problem here, I asked, stepping around the corner. Gavin jumped back, his face gray. No problem. Just asking about coffee. He brushed past me, storming back toward the conference room. I looked at the young clerk. He looked terrified. He is just stressed, I told the kid. Weddings, you know. I walked back to the conference room. Agnes was still reading. She looked up as I entered. For a brief second, her eyes met mine. There was no recognition, no conspiracy in her gaze, just a cold, hard intelligence. She knew something smelled rotten. She didn't know the whole story yet, but she was digging. I have found the survey map, Agnes announced. It appears the boundary issue was resolved in 1992. However, she paused, her finger resting on a document. I am looking at the power of attorney and the guardianship affidavit submitted by Mrs. Whitfield regarding Ms. Elara Whitfield's capacity. The room went silent. Yes, Sylvia whispered. The notary seal on the doctor's affidavit, Agnes said, peering at the paper. It is smudged, and the date seems to have been written over. I will need to call the notary to verify this commission number before I can accept it as a valid legal instrument to bypass the beneficiary's signature. Gavin looked like he was going to vomit. The notary is in Boston. It is lunchtime. They won't answer. Then we wait, Agnes said, folding her hands. We cannot wait, Gavin shouted. My investors, my liquidity. Mr. Whitfield, Agnes said, her voice like a guillotine blade. I cannot transfer a $15 million asset based on a document that looks like it was altered with a ballpoint pen. I am calling the notary. If they verify it, we sign. If not, this closing is adjourned until Monday. Monday. That was the death sentence. If he didn't get the money today, the loan sharks would come for him this weekend. Gavin looked at the Sterlings. Bob looked concerned. Linda looked annoyed. Call them, Gavin croaked. Call them now. He was bluffing. He was hoping the notary who was probably paid off would answer and lie. Or he was hoping Agnes would give up. Agnes picked up the phone and dialed. She put it on speaker. Ring, ring, ring. Hello, a woman's voice answered. This is Agnes Pembroke from Coastal Abstract, Agnes said. I am calling to verify a signature on a medical affidavit for Elara Whitfield. Notarized on August 14th. There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause. I am sorry, the voice said. I was on vacation in August. I didn't notarize anything that month. My logbook is empty. Gavin froze. The blood drained from his face entirely. Are you sure? Agnes asked, her eyes locking onto Gavin. Positive, the notary said. If my seal is on there, someone stole it, or it is a forgery. Agnes hung up the phone. The silence in the room was deafening. Well, Agnes said, looking at Gavin. That is problematic. It must be a mistake, Gavin yelled, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. She is lying, or she forgot I have the doctor's report right here. Mr. Sterling, Agnes said, ignoring Gavin. I cannot in good conscience allow you to sign these papers today. There is a cloud on the authority of the seller. I agree, Bob Sterling said, standing up. Gavin, what the hell is going on? Nothing, Gavin pleaded. Bob, please, it is just a clerical error. Look, I will get the doctor on the phone. Just give me an hour. Please, don't walk away. Bob looked at Linda. Linda looked at the clock. We really wanted to close before the weekend, Linda said. We have the movers coming Monday. 1 hour, Bob said sternly. You have 1 hour to clear this up, Gavin, or we are ripping up the check. Agnes looked at her watch. I have a lunch break from 1 to 2. I will be back at 2 o'clock. If you do not have a valid, verified affidavit by then, or if Miss Elara Whitfield does not sign the deed herself, this file is closed. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked out. Gavin slumped against the wall. He had 2 hours until 2 o'clock. He had 4 hours until the loan sharks came. And he had a notary who had just exposed his forgery. He looked at me. His eyes were wild. Elara, he gasped. Elara, you have to help me. You have to sign. If you sign the deed yourself. We don't need the affidavit. We don't need the notary. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tried to institutionalize me. But Gavin, I said, widening my eyes in mock confusion. How can I sign I am mentally incompetent? You told the court so yourself. If I sign, the contract is void because I am what was the word unstable. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was trapped in his own lie. We will fix it, he whispered. We will say you got better. Just please, sign the papers at 2 o'clock. I don't know, I said, playing with my hair. I am feeling very overwhelmed right now. Maybe I should call my therapist. No, he shouted. No therapists. Just sit there, be quiet, and sign when I tell you. He grabbed his phone and ran out of the room, presumably to call the notary and threaten her, or to find a new forger in the next 60 minutes. I sat back in the leather chair and smiled at the Sterlings. Weddings are so stressful, aren't they? I asked. Bob Sterling looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. Yes, he said. Very. The storm was coming, and I was the only one with an umbrella. The sun set over the Hawthorne Bluff, but there was no darkness tonight. The massive tent that had been erected on the south lawn glowed like a bioluminescent tumor, pulsing with light, and the thumping bass of a string quartet that had been hired to play pop covers. It was the rehearsal dinner, a final dress rehearsal for the lie that Gavin and Sylvia had been living for 5 years. I stood on the periphery of the patio, holding a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. From my vantage point, I could see them all. The Sterlings were there, laughing with a group of Gavin's business associates men who wore suits that were too shiny and laughed too loudly. My mother was floating between groups in a silver gown, playing the perfect hostess, though I could see the tremors in her hands from across the terrace. And Gavin was manic. He was moving with the frenetic energy of a man whose feet were being held to a fire. He had managed to buy himself exactly 18 hours. When the notary fiasco had stalled the closing at lunch, Gavin had somehow convinced Bob and Linda Sterling that it was a simple administrative error, a mix-up with the dates. He had promised them that we would sign everything at 9 o'clock the next morning at the lawyer's office, just hours before the ceremony. He had promised them a discount on the closing costs. He had probably promised them his kidney if they asked, but I knew the truth. The loan sharks had given him until sunset. He had missed the deadline. Now, he was living on borrowed seconds. Elara, for God's sake, stop lurking in the shadows. You look like a gargoyle. Bella appeared in front of me. She was wearing a white cocktail dress, a prelude to the main event. She held a glass of pink champagne in one hand and her phone in the other. Hello, Bella, I said. You look lovely. I know, she said, not looking up from her screen. Listen, the train on this dress is annoying me. It keeps catching on the cobblestones. Fix it. She turned her back to me, waiting. It was not a request. It was a command. She was used to this dynamic. In her mind, I was the artifact, the dusty relic that came with the house, something to be tolerated until it could be discarded. I set my glass down on a stone balustrade. Slowly, I knelt on the cold pavement. I reached for the hem of her dress. As I pinned the fabric up, my fingers brushed against her ankle. I could have pulled. I could have yanked the silk and sent her sprawling onto the stone. It would have been satisfying, but it was too small. I did not want to ruin her dress. I wanted to ruin her world. There, I said, standing up. It is fixed. About time, she huffed, spinning around. By the way, Daddy says you are signing the deed tomorrow morning. Don't be late. I need those funds to clear so I can pay the final balance on the fireworks. If I don't get my fireworks, Elara, I will literally scream. We cannot have that, I said. Don't worry, I will be there. She flounced away. Merging back into the crowd of admirers, I wiped my hands on my skirt, feeling dirty. Elara. I turned to find my mother standing behind me. She had been watching. Come with me, Sylvia said. Her voice was low, devoid of the public warmth she used for the guests. She led me away from the party, down the stone steps to the lower garden, where the noise of the quartet faded into the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs. It was dark here, the only light coming from the distant windows of the house, my house. Sylvia stopped near the old stone fountain. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a thick white envelope. She held it out to me. What is this? I asked, making no move to take it. It is $5,000, she said. Her eyes refused to meet mine. Cash, and a plane ticket to Paris. One way. It leaves tomorrow night from Logan Airport. I stared at the envelope. You are sending me away. It is for your own good, Sylvia said, her voice rushing now, desperate. After the wedding, after the sale, things are going to change. Gavin thinks it is best if you make a fresh start. Somewhere far away. You always wanted to see the Louvre, didn't you? Start a new life. There is nothing for you here anymore. It wasn't a gift. It was a severance package. It was hush money. She wanted me gone before the ink was dry. Before I could realize that the $15 million had vanished into offshore accounts and debt payments, leaving me with nothing. You are kicking me out, I stated flatly. You are selling my grandmother's house, stealing my inheritance, and now you are bribing me with $5,000 to disappear. It is not stealing, Sylvia snapped, finally looking at me. We are a family. Gavin has taken care of us for 10 years. He needs this deal. Elara, he is in trouble, real trouble. If this sale does not go through... She trailed off, a shudder running through her thin frame. So you are sacrificing me to save him, I said. I am trying to save all of us, she cried. You do not understand the pressure he is under. I took a step closer to her. The moonlight caught the diamonds around her neck Imans bought with money that should have gone to maintaining the roof of this house. Mom, I said softly, I have one question, and I want you to answer me honestly. Just this once. She gripped the envelope tighter, her knuckles white. What? Do you love me? I asked. Do you actually love me? Or have I just been an obstacle to you ever since Dad died? Am I just the baggage you had to drag along to keep Gavin happy? Sylvia opened her mouth. I watched her struggle. I watched her search for the lie, the comforting platitude. Of course I love you. Darling, it was right there, on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't say it. Not here, not in the dark, with the weight of her betrayal hanging between us. She looked at the envelope in her hand, then at the house, then at me. She closed her mouth. She lowered her eyes. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. It was louder than the waves. It was louder than the party. It was the sound of a heart breaking, final and absolute. Take the money, Elara, she whispered. Please, just go. I didn't take the envelope. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Keep it, I said. You are going to need it more than I do. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone by the fountain. I did not look back. That was the moment my mother died to me. The woman standing there was just a stranger in a stolen dress. I walked back up to the terrace, my chest feeling strangely light. The grief was gone. The hesitation was gone. There was only the cold, sharp clarity of the mission. As I reached the edge of the tent, I saw Gavin. He was standing near the bar, his back to the crowd. He was holding that cheap black burner phone again. I moved into the shadow of a pillar, watching. Gavin was listening, his body rigid. Suddenly, he flinched, as if someone had slapped him. "I know," he hissed into the phone, his voice a harsh whisper that carried on the wind. "I told you. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The money will be wired by noon. I swear on my life." He listened for another moment, and then his face twisted in terror. No. Leave her out of this. She knows nothing. Please, listen to me." The line must have gone dead. Gavin stared at the phone, his chest heaving. He looked around wildly, scanning the shadows of the garden, the perimeter of the lawn. He was checking for hitmen. He was checking for the consequences of his own greed. He shoved the phone into his pocket and turned around, grabbing a glass of whiskey from a passing waiter. He downed it in one gulp. His hands were shaking so badly that a drop of amber liquid spilled onto his white tuxedo shirt, leaving a stain that looked like old blood. He was a dead man walking. He just needed the money to buy his resurrection. While the party raged on at the Hawthorne Bluff, 10 miles away, in the quiet, dusty silence of the coastal abstract office, a lamp was still burning. Agnes Pembroke sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of paper. The office was closed. The cleaning crew had come and gone hours ago, but Agnes was still there. She pushed her glasses up her nose and squinted at the document in front of her. It was a tax assessment record from 1992. It was a boring, bureaucratic piece of paper that no one had looked at in 3 decades. But Agnes was not looking at the numbers. She was looking at a handwritten note scrawled in the margin in faded blue ink. Ref Conservation Easement Filing 44B, Restriction Pending Final Survey. Agnes frowned. She had reviewed the title report 3 times. There was no mention of a conservation easement. An easement of that nature would permanently restrict the development of the land. It would prohibit subdivisions. It would prohibit commercial transfers. She opened her laptop and logged into the State Archives database. It was a slow, archaic system, but Agnes knew how to coax secrets out of it. She typed in the reference number from the note 44-B-1992-JH. The screen spun, a digital hourglass turning over and over. Finally, a result popped up. Document type, Perpetual Conservation Restriction and Trust Amendment. Grantor Josephine Hawthorne. Grantee National Historical Preservation Trust. Status active/sealed. Agnes sat back in her chair. Sealed. That was why it hadn't shown up in the standard digital search. It was a private trust amendment, filed directly with the state's historical division, bypassing the local county clerk's general index. She picked up the phone. It was 10 o'clock at night. But she knew the number for the emergency clerk at the state archives. She had been in this business for 40 years. She knew everyone. "This is Agnes," she said, when the sleepy voice answered. "I need you to pull a physical file for me, right now. Yes, I know what time it is. It is the Hawthorne file. Reference 44B. I need you to fax me the dead man's switch clause." She waited, tapping her pen against the desk. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The fax machine in the corner hissed to life. Agnes walked over and watched the paper slide out. She read the first paragraph, then the second. A small, rare smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just spotted the checkmate in 4 moves. "Well, Mr. Whitfield," she whispered to the empty room. "It appears you have a problem." She took the fax, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the leather portfolio she would bring to the meeting tomorrow. She turned off the desk lamp. The night was dark, but the path forward was blindingly clear. Back at the house, the party was winding down. The guests were leaving, stumbling into their waiting limousines. Bella was drunk, laughing loudly as she was helped up the stairs by her bridesmaids. Gavin had retreated to his study with a bottle of scotch. I went to my room. I did not turn on the lights. I laid my outfit for tomorrow on the bed. A black tailored suit, a white silk blouse, black stilettos, sharp, professional, morning attire. I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. The waves were smashing against the rocks, oblivious to the human drama unfolding above them. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, the gavel would fall. Gavin thought he was going to a signing. He thought he was going to receive a check. He had no idea that he was walking into an execution. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I listened to the house. I listened to the creaking of the floorboards, the settling of the beams. It was groaning, heavy with the weight of the parasites living inside it. "Hold on," I whispered to the walls. "Just one more night." The elevator doors to the 42nd floor of the Vance Associates building slid open with a soft, expensive chime. I stepped out onto the plush carpet, the heels of my black stilettos sinking slightly into the wool. I had dressed for a funeral. My suit was sharp, tailored, and pitch black. My blouse was white silk, buttoned to the throat. I wore no jewelry, save for a small silver watch that I had synchronized with the atomic clock. It was 8:55 in the morning. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset who looked like she had been engineered in a laboratory for efficiency, looked up. "Can I help you?" "I am here for the Hawthorne closing," I said, my voice soft, breathless. I was channeling the version of Alara that Gavin had invented, the fragile, unstable daughter who needed to be managed. "I believe my stepfather is expecting me." "Ah, yes, the Whitfield party," she said, tapping her screen. "Conference room B, down the hall, to your left. Good luck." "Thank you," I whispered. "I think I will need it." I walked down the corridor. The walls were lined with abstract art that looked like violence captured in oil paint. I could hear the hum of the city below, muffled by thick panes of glass. But up here, the silence was heavy. It was the silence of money moving from one hand to another. I reached the heavy oak double doors of Conference Room B. I paused, taking a deep breath. This was it. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Now. I just had to make sure the shark took a bite. I pushed the doors open. The room was vast, dominated by a long boat-shaped table made of polished cherry wood. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the Boston Harbor, where boats cut through the water like toys. But no one was looking at the view. Gavin was standing at the head of the table. He looked like a man who had been electrocuted but was still standing purely out of spite. His skin was gray, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating so profusely that his collar was already damp. He was vibrating with a manic energy, arranging pens on the table with trembling hands. Sylvia sat to his right. She looked small. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. She was wearing a beige suit that washed her out, making her look like a ghost that hadn't quite faded away yet. Across from them sat the Sterlings, Bob and Linda. They looked radiant. Bob was wearing a navy blazer, and Linda was in a floral dress, flipping through a brochure for a yacht club. They were the picture of retirement bliss, completely unaware that they were sitting across from a man who would sell their organs if it meant clearing his debt. Next to Gavin was the real estate agent from Lux Coastal Realty, a man named Chad who had too many teeth and a tie that was too bright. He was tapping away on his iPad, calculating his commission. 3% of $15 million, $450,000. I could practically see the dollar signs rotating in his eyes. When I walked in, the conversation stopped. "Alara," Gavin exclaimed. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Alara, honey, you made it." He rushed over to me, grabbing my arm. His grip was bruising. He leaned in close, bringing with him the smell of stale scotch and mints. "Remember, he hissed in my ear, too low for the others to hear. You are just here to sign the quitclaim. You are happy about this. Do not say a word about the loan. Do not say a word about yesterday. Just sign, and you get your plane ticket tonight. I looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. I know. Gavin, I just want to help. I took my medicine this morning. I'm feeling much better. He relaxed slightly, patting my arm. Good girl. Good girl. He turned to the room, beaming. Everyone, look who decided to join us. It is Alara. She is feeling much better today and wanted to come personally to bless the transaction. Alara. Linda Sterling stood up and walked over, taking my hands. Oh, I am so glad you are here. Gavin told us you were having a rough time yesterday. It is so brave of you to come. I wouldn't miss it, I said, managing a shy smile. The house deserves a fresh start, and so do I. That is the spirit, Bob boomed from the table. Come, sit down. Let's get this show on the road. We have a tea time at 1. I took a seat at the far end of the table, opposite Gavin. I wanted to see him. I wanted to have a front row seat to his destruction. Gavin checked his watch. It was 9 o'clock exactly. Okay, Gavin said, clapping his hands. Let's do this. Where is the closing agent? Where is Agnes? She is on her way. The receptionist's voice came over the intercom. She just stepped off the elevator. Gavin tapped his foot against the floor. A rapid staccato rhythm that echoed in the quiet room. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a heartbeat racing toward cardiac arrest. She is slow, Gavin muttered. Why is she always so slow? Relax, Gavin, Chad the realtor said, laughing. The money isn't going anywhere. We are all here. I am relaxed, Gavin snapped. He realized he had shouted, and he quickly lowered his voice. I am just eager. Big day. Lots to do for the wedding. The doors opened again. Agnes Pembroke entered. If I had looked like a mourner, Agnes looked like the Grim Reaper's accountant. She was wearing the same steel gray suit as the day before. Her expression was unreadable, her face a mask of professional detachment, but it was what she was carrying that sucked the air out of the room. Yesterday, she had a few folders. Today, she was carrying a stack of files that was nearly a foot high. It looked like she had brought the entire archive of the Library of Congress with her. She walked to the table, her sensible shoes making no sound on the carpet. She set the stack down with a heavy, ominous thud. Dust motes seemed to dance in the air around the pile. Good morning, Agnes said. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize for being 2 minutes late. She sat down, adjusted her chair, and pulled a case form gleaming silver pens from her bag. Agnes, Gavin said, his voice straining for joviality. Good to see you again. I see you brought a lot of reading material. Due diligence. Mr. Whitfield, Agnes said. She opened the first file. Shall we begin? Yes, let's, Gavin said. The Sterlings are ready. I am ready. Alara is here to sign the deed directly, so we can skip the whole affidavit mess from yesterday. Right? Just a straight transfer. Beneficiary to buyer. We will get to the deed, Agnes said calmly. First, we must review the settlement statement. Line by line. Line by line, Gavin squeaked. Agnes, we reviewed the numbers yesterday. It is $15.5 million. The prorated taxes are $22,000. The commission is $450. It is standard math. Can't we just skip to the signatures? Agnes looked at him over her glasses. I do not skip. Mr. Whitfield, I verify. She began to read. She read the pro-rations for the heating oil. She read the transfer tax calculations to the 4th decimal point. She verified the spelling of every name. She checked the zip codes. Is this zip code correct for your current address? Mrs. Sterling? Agnes asked, pointing to a form. 06830, or is it 06831? Oh, it is 0, Linda said. Does it matter? It matters for the tax recording, Agnes said. I will need to amend this form. Please hold. She took out a bottle of correction fluid. She shook it. Shake, Shake, shake. Gavin looked like he was going to scream. He gripped the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles turned white. He looked at the clock. 9:15. Agnes, Gavin said through gritted teeth. It is a zip code. Can we please move faster? I have a wire cut off. Accuracy takes time, Agnes murmured, blowing on the correction fluid to dry it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Agnes was moving with the speed of a glacier. She was meticulous, thorough, and utterly maddening. She was weaponizing bureaucracy. I sat silently, watching Gavin. He was dissolving. The sweat was now dripping down his nose. He kept checking his phone under the table. I knew what he was seeing. Messages from the loan sharks. Where is the money? You have 2 hours. Finally. Agnes pushed a stack of papers toward the Sterlings. These are the preliminary mortgage disclosures and the buyer's acknowledgments, she said. You may sign these. Bob and Linda brightened. Finally, Bob joked. They began to sign. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of pens on paper was the only noise in the room. When they finished, Bob reached into his briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote out a cashier's check. Here we go, Bob said. Tearing the check out with a satisfying rip, he held it up. $15,500,000. The keys to the kingdom. Gavin's eyes locked onto that check. It was his salvation. It was his life. He reached out a trembling hand. Excellent, Gavin said. I can take that. No, Agnes said sharply. Her hand shot out and covered the check. The funds are to be held in escrow by the title company until the deed is recorded. You do not touch the money, Mr. Whitfield, until the transaction is closed. Gavin pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. Right, of course. Escrow. I just meant I wanted to verify the amount. The amount is correct, Agnes said. She placed the check under her paperweight. Okay, Gavin said, wiping his face with a handkerchief. They signed. The money is there. Now Alara signs the deed. Sylvia signs the trustee release, and we are done. Right 5 minutes. Agnes did not answer. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a new file. This one was old. The cover was faded, the edges frayed. It looked like it had been sitting in a basement since the Reagan administration. She placed it on top of the pile. Now, Agnes said. We moved to the transfer of title. Yes, Gavin exhaled. The title? I have completed the final title search this morning, Agnes said. She opened the old file. The smell of dust drifted across the table. And it is clear, obviously, Gavin said. We have title insurance. We discussed the survey issue yesterday, Agnes said. I was unable to reconcile the boundary line with the town records. Who cares about the boundary line? Gavin shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair back. It is 10 acres on a cliff. If we are off by a foot, who cares, Bob? Do you care? Well, not really, Bob said, looking uncomfortable at Gavin's outburst. Sit down. Gavin, you are making a scene. I am not making a scene, Gavin yelled. I am trying to conclude a business transaction, and this woman is deliberately stalling. Look at the time. It is 9:45. Mr. Whitfield, Agnes said. She stopped moving papers. She took off her glasses. She folded them and placed them on the table. She looked up at him. Her eyes were hard, flat, and absolutely terrifying. We are done, Gavin said, panting. Just stamp the damn papers, Alara. Pick up the pen, sign the deed. He shoved a document toward me. Sign it now. I looked at the pen. I looked at Gavin. I looked at Agnes. Agnes did not blink. Mr. Whitfield, Agnes said, her voice cutting through the hysteria like a razor blade. I understand you are in a hurry. I understand you have pressing financial obligations. But let me be very clear. She placed her hand on the old, dusty file. In this profession, she said, articulating every syllable, rushing for a minute means going to prison for 10 years. The room went dead silent. What did you say? Gavin whispered. I said, Agnes repeated, that if I stamp a fraudulent deed, I go to jail. If you sign a fraudulent deed, You go to jail. And I have no intention of spending my retirement in a federal penitentiary because you have a cash flow problem. Fraudulent, Sylvia gasped. What do you mean? Fraudulent. I mean, Agnes said, opening the file to reveal a yellow document with a red seal. That this property cannot be sold. Gavin froze. He looked at the document. He looked at Agnes. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like a corpse standing upright. That is impossible, Gavin stammered. I checked the trust. I checked everything. There are no restrictions. You checked the county records, Agnes said. You did not check the historical preservation archives. She turned the document around so everyone could see it. This, Agnes said, pointing to the signature at the bottom, is a perpetual conservation easement and trust amendment signed by Josephine Hawthorne in 2012. It effectively removes the Hawthorne Bluff from the commercial real estate market, forever. Gavin stared at the paper, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. I leaned forward. I picked up the pen Gavin had thrown at me. I twirled it between my fingers. Oh dear, I said, my voice dropping the facade of the scared little girl and becoming cool, amused, and deadly. That sounds like a snag, doesn't it, Gavin? Gavin's head snapped toward me. He looked at my face. He saw the smile. He saw the coldness in my eyes. And in that split second, he realized he hadn't been unlucky. He hadn't been delayed by bureaucracy. He had been hunted. You, Gavin whispered. Me, I confirmed. Agnes adjusted her glasses. Shall I read the specific clause regarding the penalty for attempted unauthorized sale? I believe it is quite comprehensive. Agnes Pembroke did not shout. She did not bang her fist on the table. She simply reached into the bottom of that abyssal stack of files and withdrew a single sheet of paper. It was not the crisp, bright white brightness of modern laser-printed bond. It was cream-colored, heavy, and textured parchment that had aged in the dark for over a decade. The edges were slightly yellowed, and the smell of old cedar and archive dust wafted across the polished mahogany table, overpowering the scent of Gavin's expensive cologne. She placed it in the center of the table, smoothing it out with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. This, Agnes said, her voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence, is the original extract from the Supreme Court of Probate, dated October 14th, 2012. It is the Fourth Amendment to the Josephine Trust. Gavin was staring at the paper as if it were a radioactive isotope. I have seen the trust, he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper rubbing against stone. I have read every page. That amendment does not exist. It does not exist in the public registry because you were looking for property deeds. Agnes corrected him, her eyes flashing with a cold, intellectual superiority. But Mrs. Josephine Hawthorne was a woman of foresight. She knew that land records can be manipulated. She knew that local clerks can be bribed, so she filed this amendment not with the land registry, but with the State Historical Preservation Commission. Agnes tapped a long, manicured fingernail on a paragraph in the middle of the page. She designated the Hawthorne Bluff as a site of permanent conservation necessity, and she attached what we in the legal profession call a dead man's switch. A what? Linda Sterling asked, her voice trembling. She had pulled her hand away from the signed documents as if they were burning. A protective trigger, Agnes explained, looking directly at Alara at me for a brief second before turning her gaze back to Gavin. Allow me to read Article 7, subsection C. She picked up the document, adjusting her glasses. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit and the frantic, hummingbird-fast beating of Gavin's pulse in his neck. It reads, any attempt to sell, mortgage, lien, or transfer the title of the property known as the Hawthorne Bluff by any individual, trustee, or entity other than the primary beneficiary, Alara Whitfield, acting of her own free will and sound mind, shall be considered an act of hostility against the estate. Agnes paused, letting the words hang in the air. And here is the operative clause, she continued. Upon the initiation of any unauthorized sale, the ownership of the entire estate shall immediately and automatically transfer to the National Historical Preservation Trust. Furthermore, the individual attempting said sale shall be immediately referred to the State Attorney General for prosecution under the Heritage Fraud Act of 1995. The silence that followed was heavy. Physical. It pressed down on our chests. Gavin's face went from gray to a translucent, sickly white. He was doing the math in his head. He wasn't just losing the $15 million. He wasn't just losing the house. He had just triggered a legal landmine that stripped him of everything. "That is not legal," Gavin stammered. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. "Chad, tell her you cannot just auto-transfer property like that. It is unconstitutional." Chad, the realtor, had backed his chair away from the table. He was holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Hey, man, don't look at me. I just listed the house. I didn't know anything about a historical preservation lock. I am out of this." "It is perfectly legal," Agnes said, placing the document back on the table. "It is a standard mechanism for protecting historical assets from predatory relatives. Your signature on that listing agreement. Mr. Whitfield, the moment you signed it, you didn't sell the house. You forfeited it." "No," Gavin roared. He lunged forward, his hands grasping for the yellowed paper. "Give me that. It is a fake. You forged it." Agnes didn't flinch. She simply laid her hand flat over the document, but before Gavin could touch her. Bob Sterling stood up. Bob was a man of leisure, a golfer, but he was also a man who had built a fortune in construction. He was big, and he was angry. He grabbed Gavin by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit and shoved him back into his chair. "Sit down, Gavin," Bob growled. "You do not touch the lady." Gavin slumped into the leather chair, breathing hard. "Bob, listen to me. It is a trick. Alara put her up to this. She is trying to sabotage the wedding." "Sabotage?" I spoke up. My voice was no longer the whisper of a frightened girl. It was clear, resonant, and dripping with contempt. "Gavin, you tried to sell a house you do not own to pay off loan sharks. Agnes didn't sabotage you. You sabotaged yourself." Gavin's head whipped toward me. The shock in his eyes was delicious. The mask of the caring stepfather melted away, revealing the rat underneath. "You knew," he hissed. "You knew about this document." "I knew Grandma hated you," I said calmly. "I knew she saw you coming a mile away. Did you really think she would leave $15 million in a jar on the counter for you to steal? She locked it up, Gavin, and she threw away the key." "But I am the guardian," Sylvia cried out. My mother's voice was high and hysterical. She was clutching her pearls, looking between Gavin and Agnes. "I am the trustee. Josephine made me the trustee. I have the right to decide what is best for the family." Agnes turned her gaze to Sylvia. It was a look of profound pity mixed with professional disdain. "Mrs. Whitfield," Agnes said, "please refer to Clause 4 of the original trust document, the one you signed 10 years ago." Clause 4. Sylvia blinked, confused. "I don't remember." "Clause 4 states that your trusteeship is conditional," Agnes recited from memory. "Sylvia Whitfield shall retain administrative powers over the estate only so long as she remains unmarried, or married to the biological father of Alara Whitfield. In the event of remarriage to any third party, all administrative powers are instantly revoked and transferred to a court-appointed independent fiduciary." Agnes leaned forward. "You lost your right to sell, manage, or even paint the walls of that house the day you said, 'I do' to Gavin. You have been living there as a guest of the trust for 10 years. You have no authority, none." Sylvia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Gavin. You told me the lawyer said it was fine. You told me my rights were intact." "He lied to you, Mom," I said. "Just like he lied about the crypto, just like he lied about the wedding money. He needed your signature. So he told you what you wanted to hear." Sylvia slumped back, tears streaming down her face, the illusion of her power, her status, Her control, it all evaporated in seconds. The Sterlings were staring at us in horror. Linda Sterling stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You tried to sell us a property you didn't own," she demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Gavin. "You let us hire movers. You let us transfer funds. Do you have any idea the liability we would have faced if we had signed those papers?" "Linda, please," Gavin begged, holding his hands out. "It is a misunderstanding. The trust is old. We can challenge it. We can go to court. I just need the funds today to fight it. Look, lend me the money. We will call it a private loan. I will pay you back double next month." "A loan." Bob Sterling laughed, a harsh barking sound. He reached across the table and grabbed the cashier's check from under Agnes's paperweight. "You are not getting a dime from us. Gavin, you are a con artist." Bob ripped the check in half. Rip, then in quarters. Rip. He threw the confetti-like pieces onto the table in front of Gavin. "That is for wasting my time," Bob said, "and you will be hearing from my lawyers regarding the deposit we already paid. I want it back by close of business today, or I am filing a lien against every asset you have left." "I don't have it," Gavin screamed, finally breaking. "I spent it. It is gone. I paid the caterers. I paid the florists." "Then you better start selling your kidneys," Bob said coldly. "Come on, Linda. We are leaving." The Sterlings marched out of the room, slamming the heavy oak doors behind them. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gavin sat alone at the head of the table. He was trembling violently. He looked at the torn pieces of the check. That was his lifeline. That was his safety. And now it was just paper trash. "It is over, Gavin," I said. "The closing is cancelled. The sale is void. And per the clause Agnes just read, the state attorney general has been notified." "You little witch," Gavin whispered. He stood up slowly. His eyes were dark voids of rage. "You think you won? You think you can just walk away? I still have friends. I can still—" The doors opened again. Gavin spun around, expecting perhaps the Sterlings returning. Or maybe a miracle. It was not a miracle. A man walked in. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like armor. He had the sharp, predatory grace of a man who spent his life tearing apart arguments in courtrooms. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a folded document in the other. It was Marcus Vance. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Gavin. "Mr. Whitfield," Marcus said. His voice was smooth, baritone, and terrifyingly calm. "I am Marcus Vance. I represent Elara Whitfield." "Vance," Gavin paled. "I thought Vance was dead." "My father is dead," Marcus said, walking to the table. "I am very much alive, and I have been very busy this morning." He tossed the folded document onto the table. It landed on top of the torn check. "That," Marcus said, "is a subpoena. You are being sued for 15 counts of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress." "You can't prove anything," Gavin spat. "It is my word against hers." Marcus smiled. It was not a nice smile. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet. He tapped the screen and turned it around. "This," Marcus said, pointing to a scanned image, "is the affidavit you submitted to the family court claiming Elara was mentally incompetent. And this," he swiped the screen, "is a sworn statement I received an hour ago from Dr. Aris Thorne, the psychiatrist whose name is on that affidavit. He states he has never met Elara Whitfield, never treated her, and certainly never signed this document. He is pressing charges for identity theft and forgery." Gavin staggered back. Hitting the wall, there was nowhere left to run. The walls of the conference room were closing in. "And finally," Marcus said, pulling out one last piece of paper, "this is a motion for an emergency restraining order and an order of eviction. Since Sylvia is no longer the trustee, and you are not the owner, you are currently trespassing on trust property." Marcus looked at his watch. "You have until sunset to vacate the Hawthorne Bluff. If you are still on the premises at 6 o'clock, the sheriff has been instructed to remove you by force." Gavin looked at Marcus. He looked at Agnes, who was calmly packing her files away. He looked at Sylvia, who was sobbing into her hands, and finally, he looked at me. "You planned this," he whispered. "You let me set up the wedding. You let me invite everyone. You let me borrow the money." "I let you be yourself, Gavin," I said. Standing up, I smoothed the front of my black suit. "I just turned on the lights." "The loan sharks," Gavin choked out. "They will kill me. If I don't pay them today, they will kill me." "Then I suggest you run," I said coldly, "because the police are coming for the fraud, and the sharks are coming for the debt. You don't have time to argue with me." I turned to Agnes. "Thank you, Ms. Pembroke. Your diligence was exemplary. Just doing my job." "Ms. Whitfield," Agnes said, snapping her briefcase shut. I turned to Marcus. "Is the car ready?" "Waiting downstairs," Marcus said. I walked toward the door, leaving Gavin hyperventilating against the wall and my mother weeping over the ruins of her life. I didn't feel sad and I didn't feel guilty. I felt lighter than I had in 10 years. I paused at the door and looked back one last time. "Oh, and Gavin," I said, "don't steal the towels when you leave. I have an inventory list." I walked out into the hallway, the sound of Gavin's despair fading behind me. The elevator was waiting. The ground floor was waiting. And beyond that, the Hawthorne Bluff was waiting for its true owner to come home. The heavy oak doors had barely clicked shut behind the Sterlings when the silence in the conference room shattered. It was not a gradual fracture, but an instantaneous explosion of violence. Gavin, who had been sitting in a catatonic stupor staring at the confetti-like remains of the cashier's check, suddenly let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. It was the noise of a man watching his life support system being unplugged. He did not look at me. He did not look at Marcus. His bloodshot eyes locked onto the yellowed parchment that Agnes Pembroke still held under her hand, the trust amendment that had sealed his fate. In his desperate, fractured mind, he must have believed that if he could destroy the paper, he could destroy the truth. "Give it to me," Gavin hissed. Lurching forward, "Mr. Whitfield, sit down," Agnes said, her voice unyieldingly calm. "It is a fake. It is a lie," Gavin roared. He scrambled over the table, his expensive Italian leather shoes kicking aside the pristine legal pads. He lunged across the mahogany surface, his fingers clawing for the document. He looked like a rabid dog, all teeth and panic. Agnes did not recoil. She simply placed her other hand over the file, protecting the integrity of the archive. Before Gavin could reach her, the air in the room shifted. 2 uniformed security officers, whom Marcus had discreetly positioned outside the door before he entered, burst into the room. They moved with the efficiency of trained professionals. One of them, a burly man with a thick neck, grabbed Gavin by the back of his suit jacket and yanked him backward. Gavin flailed, his fingernails scratching harmlessly against the polished wood of the table. "Let go of me. That is my property. She stole it. She is the thief." The guard slammed Gavin back into his chair, pinning his shoulders against the leather. "Sit down and stay down, sir, or you will be restrained on the floor." Gavin slumped, his chest heaving violently. His tie was crooked, his hair was a disheveled mess, and his face was slick with a sheen of cold sweat. He looked from the guard to Agnes, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for an escape route that did not exist. Agnes adjusted her glasses, which had not moved a millimeter during the assault. She smoothed the lapel of her gray suit and looked at Gavin with an expression of clinical disappointment. "Assaulting a sworn officer of the court during a closing proceeding," Agnes noted, her voice dry. "I will be adding that to my report." "You ruined everything," Gavin whimpered, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had appeared. $15 million. It was right there. It was on the table. "It was never yours, Gavin," I said from my corner of the room. "It was a mirage." Agnes opened her briefcase. She did not pack up her files to leave. Instead, she pulled out a new form, one with a red border that I recognized immediately. It was a federal reporting document. "Mr. Whitfield," Agnes said, uncapping her pen, "I believe you are under the impression that this meeting ends with a simple cancellation of the sale. You are mistaken." Gavin looked up, blinking. As a licensed escrow officer," Agnes continued, writing the date on the form in her neat, precise script, "I am bound by the Bank Secrecy Act and the anti-money laundering statutes. When a transaction involves attempted fraud exceeding $5 million, and when it utilizes interstate wire instructions and banking instruments like the check Mr. Sterling just destroyed it, triggers a mandatory reporting requirement." She looked up, her eyes locking onto his. "I am filing a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and I am contacting the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is no longer a civil dispute about a house, Mr. Whitfield. This is now a federal investigation into bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft." The color that had briefly returned to Gavin's face vanished again. "The FBI No, you cannot do that. Agnes, please, we go way back. I used you for the Cape Elizabeth deal 3 years ago. And I will be auditing that file as well," Agnes said mercilessly, "to ensure there were no irregularities." Beside him, my mother finally seemed to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Sylvia had been weeping quietly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, treating this like a bad social faux pas, but the mention of the FBI pierced through her denial. "Gavin," Sylvia grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "What is she talking about, federal prison? You said this was just a liquidity issue." Gavin shook her off. "Shut up, Sylvia." Sylvia recoiled, as if he had slapped her. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on Marcus, then Agnes, and finally, me. She saw the walls closing in. She saw the scandal that would destroy her social standing. The handcuffs, the mugshots, panic, raw and ugly, took over. She stood up and rushed toward me. She did not run like a mother running to her child. She ran like a drowning victim clawing for a life raft. "Alara," she cried, reaching for my hands. I stepped back, keeping the chair between us. "Alara, baby, please," Sylvia sobbed, the tears flowing freely now, ruining her mascara. "You have to stop them. Tell this lawyer to stop. Tell Agnes it was all a mistake. We didn't mean any harm. We were just confused about the paperwork." "Confused," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes, confused," she insisted, wringing her hands. "Gavin told me the trust allowed it. I didn't know about the amendment 'I am your mother.' Alara, I gave birth to you. You cannot let them take me to jail. Think of the family. Think of the shame." "The shame." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You are worried about the shame, Mom. You were going to sell the roof over my head to pay for a party. You were going to use the money from my grandmother's legacy to build a swimming pool for the daughter of the man who is robbing you blind. I was doing it for us," she shrieked, "to secure our future." "No," I said, leaning in close so she could see the absolute zero in my eyes. "You were doing it for him. You were doing it because you are weak, and you would rather sell your own daughter down the river than be alone." "It is a misunderstanding," she wailed, trying to grab my sleeve. "There is no misunderstanding when you forge medical documents to have me declared insane," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through her hysterics. "There is no misunderstanding when you try to erase my existence to turn a profit. You made your choice, Sylvia. You chose Gavin. Now you get to keep him." "Alara, please," she begged, falling to her knees on the plush carpet. It was a pathetic sight, the woman who had once commanded garden parties with an iron fist, now groveling at the feet of the daughter she had dismissed for a decade. "He is my husband, and I was your daughter," I said. Past tense. I turned away from her. I could not look at her any more without feeling a wave of nausea. Suddenly, a shrill, mechanical sound cut through the sobbing. It was the burner phone in Gavin's pocket. Ring, ring, ring. Gavin froze. The sound seemed to physically hurt him. He clapped his hands over his ears, curling into a ball in his chair. "Don't answer it," he moaned. "Don't answer it." "Who is that, Gavin?" Marcus asked, stepping forward. "Is that your creditors? The ones who expected a wire transfer at noon?" Gavin didn't answer. He was rocking back and forth. The phone kept ringing. It was the sound of a debt coming due, a debt that could not be paid with apologies or jail time. "They are going to kill me," Gavin whispered. "They said if I didn't have the money by sunset, they would come to the house. They know where I live." "Well," Marcus said, checking his watch, "the good news is you won't be at the house, and the bad news is neither will the police." "What?" Gavin looked up. At that moment, the main doors to the conference room opened again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer or a notary. 4 men walked in. They wore blue windbreakers with Economic Crimes Unit emblazoned on the back in yellow letters. They were followed by 2 uniformed police officers. The lead detective, a man with a weary face and a badge on his belt, scanned the room. His eyes landed on Gavin. "Gavin Whitfield?" the detective asked. Gavin nodded dumbly. "I am Detective Miller with the State Police Financial Crimes Division," the detective said. Walking around the table, he pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "We have a warrant for your arrest." "No," Gavin whispered. "Not now. I need time. I need to make a call." "You can make a call from the station," Detective Miller said. He grabbed Gavin's wrist and twisted it behind his back. "Arg!" Gavin yelped. "Gavin Whitfield," the detective recited, the words practiced and cold. "You are under arrest for first-degree forgery, grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the world. It was the period at the end of Gavin's sentence. Gavin didn't fight. He went limp. Sagging against the detective, he looked small. The bluster, the arrogance, the facade of the wealthy patriarch, it had all been stripped away, leaving only a frightened, middle-aged con man in a sweaty suit. "Sylvia," Gavin shouted as they began to drag him toward the door. "Call the lawyer. Call the offshore accounts. Get the money." He was delirious. There was no money. There were no accounts. Sylvia was still on her knees, watching her husband being hauled away like a common criminal. She looked up at the detective. "I didn't do anything," she stammered. "I am just the wife. I didn't know." Detective Miller stopped. He looked down at Sylvia. "Mrs. Whitfield?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered, hope flickering in her eyes. "We have questions regarding your signature on the listing agreement and the guardianship affidavit," the detective said. He gestured to one of the uniformed officers. "Please assist Mrs. Whitfield. We need to bring her in for questioning as a person of interest and potential accomplice." "Accomplice?" Sylvia shrieked. The officer took her arm, gently but firmly pulling her to her feet. "No, I am a victim, Alara. Tell them I am a victim." I stood by the window, watching the scene unfold with a detachment that surprised even me. "You are not a victim, Mom," I said quietly. "You were the getaway driver," Sylvia wailed as she was led out of the room. Her cries echoing down the hallway long after the doors had closed. The room was suddenly quiet. Only Agnes, Marcus, and I remained. The air felt cleaner, as if a toxic gas had been vented out. Agnes finished filling out her form. She capped her pen and placed it back in her bag. "I will have the official title release prepared by Monday." Agnes said to me, "The property is secure. The restriction stands." "Thank you, Agnes," I said, "for everything." Agnes nodded once, a curt, professional gesture. "I liked your grandmother. She was a bridge shark. She would have enjoyed this." She stood up and left the room, carrying her stack of files. Marcus walked over to the table and picked up the pieces of the torn check that Bob Sterling had left behind. He dropped them into the wastebasket. "Well," Marcus said, "that went according to plan." "Mostly," I said. I didn't think he would cry. They always cry when the handcuffs go on, Marcus said. So, the house is yours. The parasites are gone. What now? I looked out the window at the city of Boston below. Somewhere down there, in a police cruiser, my family was being transported to a holding cell. The wedding was 2 days away. The guests were arriving. The cake was ordered, and the bride and groom were about to find out that the venue had been seized by the authorities. Now, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Now I have a wedding to cancel, and I believe I have a very large tent on my lawn that needs to be taken down. Do you want me to handle the eviction notice for Bella? Marcus asked. No, I said, turning from the window. I want to do that myself. She wanted a dramatic wedding. I think I should give her a dramatic finale. I picked up my purse. The weight of the last 5 years was gone. I felt dangerous. I felt free. Let's go, Marcus, I said. I have a speech to write. The drive from downtown Boston back to the coast of Maine usually felt like a decompression chamber, a slow release of city pressure as the highway turned into winding coastal roads. But today, the silence inside the black SUV was not relaxing. It was electric. Marcus Vance sat in the driver's seat, his knuckles loose on the wheel, humming a low tune that sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the pine trees blur past, feeling the hum of the engine vibrating through the soles of my shoes. We did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The legal grenades had been thrown. The explosions had happened, and now we were simply driving to the impact crater to survey the damage. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon when we pulled up to the iron gates of the Hawthorne Bluff. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns, painting the world in a deceptive, honey-colored light. From the road, everything looked perfect. The massive white marquee tent on the south lawn was billowing gently in the ocean breeze. A fleet of luxury cars, Bentleys, Porsches, Maseratis lined the circular driveway like expensive beetles. The sound of a jazz band drifted over the stone wall. A cheerful, syncopated rhythm that felt obscene given what had transpired in a sterile conference room 3 hours ago. "Ready for the encore?" Marcus asked. Putting the car in park, I checked my reflection in the vanity mirror. My black suit was still crisp. My lipstick was still red. I looked like an executioner who had stopped for a martini. "I was born ready," I said. We stepped out of the car. I had called ahead to a private security firm one Marcus recommended, and 2 large men in dark suits met us at the entrance to the tent. They were not there to protect the guests. They were there to enforce my property rights. "Ms. Whitfield," the lead guard nodded. "We have secured the perimeter. The local police have been notified of the eviction order and are on standby." "Good," I said. "Let them party for 5 more minutes. I want a full audience." I walked toward the tent. The welcome white party. A pretentious prelude to the actual wedding was in full swing. 300 of New England's social elite were sipping champagne, eating oysters, and gossiping. They wore linen and silk, diamonds and pearls, all of them oblivious to the fact that they were standing on a crime scene. I entered the tent from the rear, moving through the catering service area. I saw the staff plating hors d'oeuvres. I saw the cases of wine my father's wine collection. I noted with a surge of anger being uncorked. And then I saw her. Bella was standing on a raised platform in the center of the tent, bathed in the spotlight. She wasn't wearing a simple cocktail dress. True to her nature, she had treated this rehearsal dinner as a second wedding. She was wearing a white, corseted ball gown with a train that spilled over the edge of the stage, a tiara sparkling in her hair. She looked like a princess in a fairy tale, but her face told a different story. She was clutching her phone, screaming at someone or no one. "Where are they?" she screeched, her voice cutting through the jazz music. "It has been 6 hours. Why aren't they answering? The photographer is waiting. I need Mom to fix my veil. I need Daddy to sign the check for the band." The guests near the stage looked uncomfortable, swirling their drinks and pretending not to hear the bride's meltdown. Her fiancé, a man named Julian, stood nearby. Julian was a man who had been designed by an algorithm for generic trophy husband. He had perfect teeth, a tan that came from a bottle, and a resume that listed his occupation as investor, which everyone knew was code for unemployed trust fund hunter. He looked bored. Checking his own reflection in the back of a spoon, I signaled to the sound technician, a young guy in a black t-shirt who looked terrified of Bella. "Give me the mic," I said. "I can't," he stammered. The bride said. Marcus stepped up behind me, flashing a piece of paper that looked official enough to stop a heart. "She is the owner of the property. Give her the mic." The tech handed it over instantly. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The click of my heels on the wooden platform was swallowed by the music. I stood behind Bella, waiting. "If Daddy doesn't get here in 10 minutes, I'm going to fire him from the wedding," Bella yelled into her phone. "I am serious. I will walk myself down the aisle." "He is not coming." "Bella," I said into the microphone. The sound boomed through the massive tent. Magnified by the speakers, the jazz band stopped abruptly. 300 heads turned. The silence that fell over the crowd was sudden and absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the waves. Bella spun around. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. "Elara," she hissed. "What the hell are you doing? Get off my stage. You are ruining the aesthetic. You are wearing black to a white party." "It is appropriate," I said, my voice calm, amplified, filling every corner of the tent. "Because this is a wake." "A what?" Bella laughed. A nervous, high-pitched sound. "You are drunk. Go away. Where are Mom and Gavin? Did you see them? They were supposed to be back from the closing hours ago with the money." "The closing," I repeated. Looking out at the crowd, I saw the Sterlings near the back, looking grim. They had come to watch the fireworks. I realized. "Yes, let's talk about the closing." I signaled to the AV technician again. "Cut the slideshow. Input 2, the massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been cycling through a slideshow of Bella and Julian's engagement photos shot in Paris. Paid for by credit card debt flickered. The romantic images vanished. In their place, a stark, high-contrast image appeared. It was a mugshot. Gavin Whitfield, front and profile. He looked disheveled, his tie missing, his eyes wild with fear. Below it was the booking information from the state police. Charges wire fraud, grand larceny, forgery. A collective gasp went through the room. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne glass. Smash. "Daddy," Bella whispered, turning to look at the screen. She blinked, her brain unable to process the image. "Is that a joke?" "It is a bad joke. Turn it off." "It is not a joke." "Bella," I said. "Gavin was arrested at 11:30 this morning. He is currently being held at the county detention center without bail. And your mother—" I clicked the remote I had taken from the tech. The image changed. It was Sylvia. She wasn't in a mugshot yet, but it was a photo taken by a news crew outside the police station, Sylvia being led into the precinct by 2 detectives. Her face buried in her hands. "Your mother is currently being interrogated as an accomplice to a $15 million fraud scheme," I announced. "Liar." Bella screamed. She lunged at me, her hands curled into claws. "You did this, you jealous witch! You made this up!" Before she could touch me, the security guard I had hired stepped out from the shadows and blocked her path. He didn't touch her. He just stood there like a wall of granite. Bella bounced off him, stumbling back in her massive dress. "I didn't make anything up," I said, addressing the crowd. "My stepfather and mother attempted to sell this estate, the Hawthorne Bluff, by forging my signature and falsifying medical records to have me declared insane. They intended to use the proceeds to pay off gambling debts and to fund this." I gestured around the tent. "This circus." I looked at Julian. The groom, he was staring at the screen, his face pale. "And for those of you wondering about the wedding," I continued, my voice hard as steel, "there is no money. The checks for the caterers will bounce on Monday. The venue fees were never paid because I own the venue, and I never agreed to host this event. This house is my property, and I am canceling the party." "You can't," Bella shrieked. She was crying now, black mascara running down her face. "It is my wedding. People flew in from Europe. You cannot do this to me." "I just did," I said. "You have exactly 1 hour to remove your personal belongings and your guests from my land. After that, the police will begin issuing citations for trespassing." The crowd began to murmur. It started as a buzz and quickly grew into a roar. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures, texting the scandal to everyone they knew. This was better than a wedding. This was a social execution. Bella looked around frantically, searching for an ally. Her eyes landed on Julian. "Julian!" she cried, reaching out to him. "Do something. Tell her to get out. Tell her we will sue her." Julian didn't move toward her. He took a step back. He looked at the mugshot of his father-in-law-to-be. He looked at the frantic, hysterical woman in the ruined dress, and then he did the math. "Julian," Bella whimpered. "Is it true?" Julian asked, his voice cold. He looked at me. "Is the money gone? Is the family bankrupt?" "Gavin is millions in debt," I answered him directly. "And the assets they claim to have, they never existed. The only thing Bella is inheriting is the shame." Julian looked at Bella. The adoration, the love, the "till death do us part," it all vanished, replaced by the sneer of a man who realized he had bet on a losing horse. "I can't believe this," Julian muttered. "I told my investors, I told my parents." "Julian, baby, it is fine," Bella pleaded, walking toward him, her dress rustling like dry leaves. "We can fix it. We are famous. We can sell the photos." "Fix it," Julian laughed. "Your dad is a felon. Bella, you are broke. Do you think I'm going to marry into a RICO case?" He turned his back on her. He didn't even say goodbye. He walked off the stage, pushed through the crowd of stunned guests, and headed for the exit. "Julian!" Bella screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. "Julian, come back. Don't leave me." She ran to the edge of the stage, but her heavy dress caught on a monitor speaker. She tripped, falling hard onto the wooden planks. Her tiara skittered across the floor. She lay there, a heap of white tulle and misery. Sobbing into the wood, the spotlight was still on her. The 300 guests were staring at her. It was the center of attention she had always craved. But it was a spotlight that burned. I walked over to her. I stood over her, looking down. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was small, and it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the rose garden she had planned to bulldoze. "The show is over, Bella," I said softly, but the microphone picked it up, broadcasting my whisper to the entire lawn. I turned to the guests. "Please vacate the premises," I said. "The gates will be locked in 60 minutes." I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a thud that echoed like a gavel. I walked down the stairs, past the security guards, past the shocked faces of the people who had eaten my food and drunk my wine. Marcus was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. "Brutal," he said. "Necessary," I replied. As we walked back toward the house, I heard the sound of engines starting. The Bentleys and Porsches were fleeing the sinking ship. Behind us, on the stage, Bella continued to weep, alone in the spotlight, surrounded by the wreckage of a life built on lies. The sun had finally set. The air was cooling. I took a deep breath of the salt air. It smelled clean. It smelled like justice. "Do you want me to call the cleaning crew tonight?" Marcus asked. "No," I said, looking up at the dark windows of the Hawthorne Bluff. "Let the mess sit for a night. I want to enjoy the quiet." I walked up the stone steps to the front door, took the key from my pocket, the key I had kept on my chain for 10 years, and unlocked the door. I was home. The last limousine taillights faded into the dusk, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The white tent, once a cathedral of vanity, was now just a hollow shell flapping in the wind. The ground was littered with abandoned champagne flutes, half-eaten oysters, and the crushed petals of white hydrangeas that had cost more than a college tuition. I stood in the center of the driveway, watching the exodus, Bella was still sitting on the stage in the distance, a white smudge against the darkening sky. She had stopped screaming. Now, she was just staring at the floor, picking at the tulle of her ruined dress, like a child picking at a scab. A yellow taxi, a stark contrast to the fleet of Bentleys that had just departed, pulled up to the main gate. The driver hesitated, intimidated by the iron fencing, before creeping up the driveway. The back door flew open before the car even came to a full stop. My mother stepped out. Sylvia looked like she had aged 20 years in the last 6 hours. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet of perfection, was loose and wild. Her makeup was smeared. She was still wearing the beige suit she had worn to the closing, but now it was rumpled and stained with what looked like coffee or tears. She didn't see the emptiness of the tent. She didn't see the debris. She saw only me. "You!" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet evening air. She ran toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She looked like a banshee, a vengeful spirit returning to haunt the living. "You ungrateful, spiteful little wretch!" Sylvia screamed, stopping just inches from my face. She raised her hand to slap me. I caught her wrist in midair. I didn't squeeze. I didn't twist. I just held it there, suspended, staring into her eyes with a calmness that terrified her more than violence ever could. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Sylvia," I said softly, "assault is another charge you really cannot afford right now." She ripped her arm away, breathing heavily. How could you? How could you do this to your own family? Your father is in jail. Gavin is sitting in a cell with common criminals because of you." "Gavin is not my father," I corrected her. "And he is in a cell because he stole $15 million and tried to sell a historical landmark. It was a business deal," she wailed, throwing her hands up. "We were going to pay it back. We just needed time. But you had to ruin it. You had to humiliate us in front of the whole world. Do you know what they are saying on the news? They are calling us grifters. They are calling me an accomplice." "If the shoe fits," I said. "I am your mother." She sobbed, switching tactics instantly from rage to martyrdom. "I changed your diapers. I fed you. I gave you a home. You gave me a room in a house you didn't own," I said. "And then you tried to sell that house out from under me by telling a judge I was crazy. That is not mothering. Sylvia, that is predation. I was protecting you," she lied, believing her own delusion. "You aren't capable of managing an estate like this. It is too much for you. We were going to give you money. We were going to send you to Paris." "With $5,000, I reminded her. "Hush money." "It was a start," she cried. "But now we have nothing. The accounts are frozen. The lawyers are demanding retainers we cannot pay. You have destroyed us. Elara, are you happy? Does it feel good to see your mother destitute?" I looked at her. I looked for a shred of guilt, a flicker of remorse. I saw only self-pity. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. "It does not feel good," I said honestly. "It feels necessary." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a folded document. I held it out to her. "What is this?" she sniffled, eyeing the paper suspiciously. "This," I said, "is a restraining order granted by the emergency magistrate this afternoon. It forbids you and Gavin Whitfield from coming within 500 feet of me or this property." Her eyes went wide. "You can't be serious." "I am very serious," I said. "And this second document is an emergency eviction notice. Since you are no longer the trustee, and since you have been using the property to facilitate a felony, your right of occupancy has been revoked immediately." I checked my watch. It was 6:15 in the evening. "You and Bella have exactly 60 minutes, I stated, my voice cutting through the twilight like a knife. "1 hour. You may take your clothing and personal toiletries. You may not take furniture. You may not take artwork. You may not take the silver. You may not take anything that belongs to the Josephine Trust." 60 minutes, Sylvia gasped. But we have 10 years of life in this house. We cannot pack in an hour. Then I suggest you hurry, I said. Because at 7:15, the locks get changed. Whatever is left inside becomes the property of the estate. This is cruel, she screamed. We have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. We don't have a car. Gavin's Porsche was seized. There is a Motel 6 in Ogunquit, I said, pointing toward the gate. I hear their rates are reasonable, and as for a car, I believe that taxi is still waiting. Elara, please, she begged, grabbing my lapel. We are family. You cannot kick your family out on the street. I gently peeled her fingers off my suit, one by one. Family died the day you signed that listing agreement. Mom, I said. Family died when you looked me in the eye last night and told me to leave so you could sell my heritage. You don't want a daughter, you want a co-conspirator, and I quit. I turned to the shadows near the porch. Officers. 2 uniformed deputies stepped into the light. They weren't the economic crimes detectives. They were local sheriff's deputies I had called to enforce the eviction. They looked uncomfortable, but resolute. Ma'am, the older deputy said to Sylvia, we are here to keep the peace and oversee the vacate order. You have 58 minutes remaining. Sylvia looked at the police, then at the house, and finally at Bella, who had wandered up from the tent, dragging her dress through the dirt. Mom, Bella whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. What is happening? Julian left. Everyone left. We have to pack, Bella, Sylvia whispered, her voice hollow. We are being evicted. Evicted, Bella laughed, a manic, broken sound. But I live here. Not anymore, I said. They ran inside. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to watch them frantically shoving designer clothes into suitcases. I stayed on the porch, leaning against the railing, listening to the sounds of their panic echoing through the open windows. I heard drawers being ripped open. I heard hangers clattering. I heard Bella screaming about her shoes. Agnes Pembroke stepped up beside me. She had stayed through it all, a silent sentinel of justice. You handled that with remarkable restraint, Agnes noted. I learned from the best, I said, nodding at her. They will try to steal the jewelry, Agnes warned. The grandmother's pearls. Let them, I said, looking at the ocean. The pearls are fake. I swapped the real ones into the safety deposit box 5 years ago. They are stealing glass. Agnes smiled. It was the first time I had seen her truly smile in 2 days. Josephine would have been very proud. At 7:15 exactly, the front door opened. Sylvia and Bella emerged. They looked like refugees from a fashion show disaster. Sylvia was dragging 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases that were bursting at the seams. Bella was carrying an armful of dresses on hangers, dropping shoes as she walked. She had taken off the ball gown and was wearing a tracksuit. Her face scrubbed raw of makeup. They stopped on the porch. The deputies stood behind them. We are done, Sylvia spat, not looking at me. I hope you rot in this big, empty house. Elara, I hope the ghosts haunt you. The only ghosts in this house were you and Gavin, I said. And now they are gone. They walked down the steps. There was no limousine waiting, no chauffeur, just the yellow taxi that Sylvia had kept waiting on the meter for an hour. The driver popped the trunk, looking annoyed at the mountain of luggage. Bella tried to shove her dresses into the trunk, but they wouldn't fit. She had to pile them into the back seat, sitting on top of them, crushed against the window. Sylvia got into the passenger seat. She looked back at the house one last time. For a second, our eyes met. I saw fear. I saw regret. But mostly, I saw the realization that she had gambled everything on a man who had sold her out and lost the daughter who would have saved her. The taxi pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the long, winding driveway. The iron gates swung shut behind them with a final metallic clang. They were gone. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 22. The air tasted different. It was mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen flashed a number I knew by heart. Gavin calling from County Correctional Facility. He was using his one phone call. He was calling me. Not a lawyer, not Sylvia, me. He probably wanted to beg. He probably wanted to offer me a deal. Tell me where some hidden money was if I would just drop the charges. Or maybe he wanted to threaten me one last time. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds. "Goodbye, Gavin," I whispered. I pressed the red block caller button. Then I went into my settings and blocked the number permanently. I turned to Marcus, who was leaning against one of the stone pillars, watching me. "It is done," I said. "Not quite," Marcus said. He pointed to the ground near my feet. Lying on the porch was a single, heavy envelope. It was one of the wedding invitations, cream cardstock, gold lettering, embossed with a crest that Gavin had invented for himself. "Mr. and Mrs. Gavin Whitfield invite you to the marriage of their daughter, Bella at the Hawthorne Bluff." I picked it up. It felt heavy with pretension. I walked to the edge of the balcony, overlooking the cliffs where the waves were smashing against the rocks below. The moon was rising, casting a silver path across the water. I took the invitation in both hands. Rip, I tore it down the middle, then again, and again, until it was nothing but a handful of confetti. I opened my hands and let the wind take it. The pieces swirled in the air, dancing like white moths for a moment before disappearing into the darkness of the sea. "Agnes," I said, turning back to the 2 people who had helped me reclaim my life. "Marcus." "Yes, Ilara," Agnes asked. "Call the locksmith," I commanded, my voice ringing with the authority of the lady of the manor. "I want every lock on this property changed tonight. I want the gate codes reset. And call the restoration team at Ironwood." "You want to start the renovation?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "I want that tent gone by noon. I want the rose garden replanted. I want the paint stripped from the foyer. I want every trace of Gavin and Sylvia scrubbed from these walls." I looked up at the house. It stood tall and proud against the night sky, its windows dark but waiting for light. It had survived storms. It had survived time. And now, it had survived my family. "The Hawthorne Bluff has returned to its rightful owner," I declared. I walked to the massive oak front doors. They were heavy, solid, enduring. I placed my hand on the brass handle, feeling the cold metal warming under my touch. I stepped inside the foyer. It was quiet. The chaos was gone. The shouting was gone. There was only the smell of old wood, salt air, and potential. I looked back at the night one last time, at the driveway where the taxi had vanished, taking my past with it. "Get out," I whispered to the memory of them. And then, with a sound that echoed like a thunderclap, final and satisfying, I slammed the door shut. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing Ilara take back what was hers, please make sure to subscribe to the Blue Payback channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach even more people who need a little victory today.